The good news is...
The Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc harvest has been a whopper this year.
But actually, that's not as great as it sounds.
And that's set to cause some headaches, but not from drinking too much, of course.
Basically, they grew too many grapes.
An unprecedented amount of fruit never made it to a winery, withering on the vine or rotting on the ground as New Zealand wine growers grappled with oversupply and also declining global demand.
So, a potential glut of wine, but who's going to drink it? I can't do it all by myself, and that Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is best served fresh.
In the last 10 to 15 years, each of us, on average, have slashed our consumption of New Zealand wine by 50%. I mean, that is dramatic.
Some estimates suggest that last year 100,000 tonnes of grapes, roughly a fifth of the potential crop, were left on the vines. The 2026 harvest is upon us, and the same thing is likely to happen again.
Well, vineyards around the country are approaching harvest time, and while it's still probably too early to tell how the vintage will go, there are concerns that, like last year, grapes will be left unpicked.
I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly, and today on The Detail, wine writer Michael Cooper talks about what he describes as the crisis facing the industry, while viticultural researcher and wine master Ross Wise tempers that with some encouraging news about new developments where New Zealand is at the top of its game.
It's a fast-moving space. I think we were ahead of the game with our lighter wines project. So no, I think we have to solidify that and make sure we're really innovative with new products and getting some exciting products out to the market. So I think we're right at the front edge of it.
I met Michael Cooper in his beautiful garden on Auckland's North Shore. He's serious about how worrying this situation is, especially after new figures were released in the New Zealand Wine Growers Annual Report, showing a dramatic drop in our wine consumption.
A word that popped into my head the other day was calamitious. Really? I mean,
Calamitious.
Just imagine if you're a winemaker and suddenly your domestic market, the people who you're pouring all your passion, into catering for, they're now drinking only a half of your wine in terms of the whole industry that they used to only 10 or 15 years ago.
So that figure, because what you're saying here is that there's another figure on here that says the imported wine share of New Zealand domestic market, 47.8%. But if we go back to New Zealanders drinking less than half what they did 14 odd years ago, is that because they're drinking less altogether? Because that's what we're hearing, isn't it?
Their consumption of wine has dropped to sort of a bit over a third.
In New Zealand and around the world, consumption is falling.
We're seeing demographic shifts. Younger consumers aren't necessarily migrating to wine as their first drink of choice.
At the same time, unfortunately for the New Zealand industry, their consumption of New Zealand wine has dropped by, about a half. And so what that shows is that the share of the domestic New Zealand market that's held by imported wines has gone up. About a decade ago, it was approximately a third of the wine we drank was from overseas. Now it's nearly half.
Why? Cheaper?
Cheaper, exactly. So really now, the fact that we're 50% imported wines, a classic case would be a wine that many listeners will remember well, Montana Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. Now, the first vintage of that came out in 1979, and it took the world by storm. So through the 1980s, you get this huge surge of vineyard expansion in Marlborough. Everybody's leaping into Sauvignon Blanc, and British wine commentators are coming here or tasting the wines in London and saying how striking they are. Okay, so then for 30 years, we happily exported Montana Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc and heaps of other Marlborough Sauvignon Blancs. But what happened about 3 or 4 years ago? The owner of Montana decided that the wine had to be retailing at less than, say, $10 or $12, and they simply could not achieve that price target growing the grapes in Marlborough. So what do? they simply sourced the Sauvignon Blanc grapes from South Australia and took the word Marlborough off the label. So what had been for 30 years a world-famous wine, Montana Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, suddenly became Montana Sauvignon Blanc. And if you read the small print, it was actually an Australian wine.
Oh, I didn't even know that happened. And who is the owner?
Well, at that point, it was Pernod Ricard, but Pernod Ricard, a couple of years ago, checked out of the New Zealand wine scene on the grounds that it was premiumising its wine investments. And they also owned Church Road, for example, with wines like Tom's selling in the $100 to $200 range. And even those really, really top, highly regarded Hawke's Bay wines did not suit their strategy of premiumisation. And so it's now owned by an Australian company of people who invest in struggling wine companies and hoping to make money. But more and more of our big companies are now overseas owned, and more of those wines that are getting shipped are sort of bulk wines. And so what that means is that for the majority of wine producers in New Zealand, they're small, they're family owned, and they're confronted with the reality that their domestic market is halved. And of course, for so many of them, export is something they would love to do, but really, struggle to do.
They struggle to do it because their wines are too expensive. The market doesn't want them.
Scale becomes an issue. If you're making a relatively small volume of wine, then to be traipsing around the world in itself, is a challenge. I suppose one good thing is that a number of smaller wineries are telling me recently that we've been too complacent about the export markets, that we only have been pursuing English-speaking markets like the United States, the number one market, or the UK, the number two market, or Australia, the number three market. But they're waking up to the fact now they've got to become more energetic, more innovative, and they're now chasing other markets which are less immediately attractive, but they offer the chance to diversify. You'd be talking China or Russia or, heaps of other countries where, mind you, Russia.
Not Russia.
Not Russia, because those who were established in Russia, of course, have lost their access now.
Oh, there were some in Russia.
Yeah. I'll never forget Chris Seyfried, from the Nelson winery, telling me how much vodka he had to drink to actually swing a deal to get his wine imported into Russia. But of course, under the current government moves, that market now has gone. And China, which has worked so well for most of our export industries, really hasn't worked all that well for wine.
Hasn't it?
There were all sorts of promises that were made, but by and large, like China's consumption of wine over the last 5 years has gone down, not up. Whereas, say, 10 years ago, people who were newly middle class were leaping into wine. But as you know, China's had its own internal economic challenges, and wine consumption has dropped, and it hasn't worked to New Zealand's advantage, really.
Michael says at the same time, New Zealand wine has never been better.
We really do have the inherent potential to make truly great wine. Unfortunately, though, this has coincided with the global, across the whole globe, slump in wine consumption. And the other thing is that some of the regions in New Zealand, despite the excellence of their wine, they run into head-on competition. Now, if you take, say, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, its great asset is that very few places in the world can make Sauvignon Blanc that is so full-on, that just leaps out of the glass, and if you like that style of wine, it seduces you and you can become a loyal consumer. Hawke's Bay, our second largest region, makes terrific Chardonnay, terrific Cabernet Merlot, and really good Syrah and so on. But the problem is there are lots of other regions around the world that succeed with those varieties as well. So our excellence doesn't necessarily guarantee, major global demand. So the reality is the wines are getting better and better.
Across the board, or in New Zealand
wines, yeah. The vines are getting more and more mature, and that partly reflects, inevitably the existing vineyards are getting older. There's a big reduction in the amount of planting because clearly supply has caught up with demand. But the winemakers are getting older as well, and the vines, so they're getting more experienced.
And that's all good.
That's all
the
good.
age of the winemakers as well as the vines, that's a good thing.
So New Zealand wine has never, ever been better than what it is now, but the audience is smaller.
Gen Z is drinking way less alcohol, and hospitality venues are paying the price. A Health New Zealand survey revealed last year that 1 in 5 young people chose not to drink. And while live music venues in Christchurch say good for them, they're struggling to keep their doors open.
Sometimes we have the stereotype of the kind of 18 to 24-year-old age group going to bars and being the consumers of alcohol. Yeah. But actually, this is one of the groups that's down the lowest in terms of what they're consuming.
You can argue that that's a good thing, of course, because it means that we're seeing less behaviour that is potentially problematic. The counter-argument is, though, that we all like to have some pleasure in life. And so, let's have a little bit of chocolate. Let's have a glass or two of wine, from time to time. But let's be moderate in our behaviour. And I think we need to celebrate the fact that that's what wine has done for New Zealand.
The current state of the industry, how would you describe it?
It truly is a crisis. I've certainly seen nothing like this in my time in and around the wine industry, which dates back, to, in terms of a professional engagement, to 1975, 15 years within the wine industry, and then, 35 years as a commentator on the industry. No one really saw this coming. In New Zealand now, there's talk of, uprooting of vineyards. What leading into that, you can already see in the stats, is the lack of expansion of vineyards. For example, take Central Otago Pinot Noir, which has been so popular for so long. But if you look at the stats, there's been hardly any Pinot Noir planted in Central Otago for 10 years. And then let's look at Hawke's Bay, the second biggest region. Their total vineyard plantings have gone backwards. Gisborne, vineyard area decreased. Auckland, you think of these lovely areas around Auckland, Clevedon and Matakana and so on, Waiheke. The reality is the vineyard area is now smaller than what it was 10 years ago. Same in Nelson. Nelson has this sort of image of being really sunny, which it is, but what people don't realise, that it's also problematically wet. And so that means that Nelson shares some of Gisborne's problems when it comes to rainfall. So about a half of the country's wine regions, their actual vineyard area is decreasing.
Right, because of climate change, partly because of climate change,
partly
and also because of the market.
But essentially, more than the climatic influences, it would reflect the decline in market demand.
So what does the industry do about it? What can you do? You can't make people drink more. It's not... If people are not drinking as much wine, isn't it the right way to go to decrease the area, to reduce the area that you've got your vines planted on?
Well, there's a lot of talk within the industry, of course. There's talk about a greater need to innovate. And so you're seeing that, for example, with, like a winery told me a couple of weeks ago, they're going to release their Wairarapa Pinot Noir in a 500ml bottle, which to me sounds like a good idea, because that means 2 glasses for 2 people. So I would have thought that for a couple, that's really convenient.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. But on a much bigger scale, we're seeing the launch of low alcohol or even no alcohol wines, which kind of raises the issue, can a so-called wine with no alcohol even be called a wine? What I can say is, and these products are obviously not aimed at people like me, but the no alcohol wines that I taste, to be gentle, taste awful.
Well, progress is being made on that front. Let's bring in Blenheim-based Ross Wise. He's back home after a spell in Canada and leads the Brigato Research Institute's viticultural research with a range of projects looking at quality and increasing productivity.
It's a changing demographics for wine consumers at the moment. That's a big focus for the industry, making sure we've got new and exciting products that newer customers really want to enjoy. So we can support wineries by creating innovative new wine products. An example of that, obviously, there's a big trend of low and no alcohol wines at the moment. So a big focus for us is making sure we're pretty active in helping wineries make fresher, lighter styles of wines. So that's one way we're reacting.
How's that going in terms of, the no and low alcohol? Are there good developments happening there? Because in a way it's kind of weird, isn't it, to be focusing on taking the alcohol out of wine?
Yeah, it's become a significant category within the wine market for sure. New Zealand actually led the way with lighter wines, with the Lighter Wine Research Project that was conducted through around 2015, where they used actually vineyard management and vineyard canopy management to create wines that still had great flavour and aroma but lower sugar levels, which was really innovative and probably a bit ahead of its time there. So New Zealand was sort of a leader for the wine industry for this trend. I think now the research focus has probably moved more to the winery, again, supporting innovation and making sure they've got tools. One example of what we're working on this year, we've got a project assessing various yeasts and their ability to produce great quality wines, but with a lower conversion of that sugar to alcohol, so trying to reduce alcohol through yeast activity. We're also trialling some different techniques that can enhance mouthfeel and texture of low alcohol wines. Obviously, alcohol provides a bit of body and weight to the wines, so sort of replacing this or mimicking this in the absence of alcohol is an area for potential quality improvement that we're looking at. But yeah, it's definitely, I think there's a lot of innovation going on in this space at the moment, not just from us, but with wineries as well.
What else then? What else can you tell me? I mean, I know that there's some new varieties of wine that are coming out, but, is the focus shifting in any way to deal with these challenges?
It's not just a New Zealand challenge. I think it's a global challenge. I think managing the costs of production is definitely top of mind for producers. I think costs skyrocketed during COVID and they haven't really come back since then. So there's also a lot of market pressure on wine prices. So cost pressure is definitely top of mind for producers. So we've got a few projects looking to find efficiencies in the way vineyards are managed, for example, whether that be through a new pruning technique, such as our Longspur pruning trial, or creating new and innovative canopy systems that might require less inputs or less tractor passes to help save costs and save inputs in the vineyard. So that's another big focus for us at the moment.
What about the impact of climate change and how to adapt to that? I mean, you did a whole paper on that in Canada. Coming back to New Zealand, are we facing similar challenges in that area?
Yeah, I'd say we perhaps haven't experienced the impacts of extreme heat or extreme cold as much as some Northern Hemisphere regions have, such as where I came from in the Pacific Northwest. But I think we definitely do have concerns around extreme weather events, probably mainly rainfall, tropical storms, and drought would be our big three. So that's definitely front of mind. We've got a couple of research projects underway, sort of trying to get ahead of that and get some tools in place. One example of that would be we've got a rootstock trial underway in Marlborough, assessing 15 different rootstocks that are for their drought tolerance. So rootstocks is the bottom part of the vine that you can graft the grape variety onto. And each rootstock will have different growing characteristics. So this is assessing 15 different rootstocks for their impact on how they respond to drought or reduced irrigation, and how they impact wine quality ultimately, with the aim to give growers good tools to reduce their water use and protect them if we do get a prolonged drought period here in Marlborough.
And what is the feeling of wine growers at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's a cautious time for wine growers at the moment. I think obviously watching the global supply situation closely, while there is still good demand for New Zealand wines, there's obviously challenges in some markets, stating the obvious there. But yeah, I think watching supply as well and just managing their fruit intake so they don't have a winery full of wine. Obviously, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc's best consumed fresh, so I think making sure that supply is matching demand and not too much stock is being built up is important.
I asked Ross for his view on predictions that 20% of grapes will be left on the vine again this season because of oversupply.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that statistic. I think obviously last year we had a very big harvest due to almost perfect flowering conditions. So it was an extremely big harvest in 2025. I think this year, after that big harvest, and obviously there's a lot of supply in place for the New Zealand wine industry, but I think growers are being very cautious this year. So I'd be surprised if there was unharvested fruit to the levels we saw last year. I think crop levels have been closely managed throughout the season. A lot of adjustments were made at pruning time and during the season. And I think if there's fruit left unharvested, it'll just be a last adjustment if needed. But I know wineries have been carefully thinking about their intake and will be managing their intake. So again, I don't have that statistic, but I think growers have been very proactive heading into this season.
I mean, I talked to Michael Cooper, the wine writer, who says to me that this industry it's a crisis.
Yeah, I don't know about the crisis, to be honest. I think New Zealand wine's still got a lot of appeal around the world. We make all the right styles that are doing well in the world of wine at the moment. So I think we've definitely got a desirable product. I think we've had 3 big harvests out of the last 4 due to ironically great weather conditions. I think that's our challenge, is just managing supply. But we're definitely making a product that people want to drink, and we certainly haven't sacrificed quality during this time.
But Michael Cooper isn't so optimistic.
It's tough times because I think the trends that we are seeing, some people talk about, the impact of COVID or, the economy in the last year or two has been unexpectedly subdued. But the underlying trends go back decades. And I think that for people who are currently in the industry, we are going to see ongoing rationalisation. We've already seen it, for example, recently in Hawke's Bay. It's been going on for decades, but inconspicuously. You notice the newcomers, you don't notice how many people actually don't succeed. But to sum up, I don't think there's any easy answer here, Sharon. I do think that the industry will survive in a changed form, because wine, for many people, is one of the great pleasures in life. People will drink less of it, but many people will continue to enjoy it, and New Zealand wines are sufficiently distinctive that they will continue to enjoy an overseas presence. But I think there has to be an acceptance that the volumes are down, and we're seeing it with all of the projections for this 2026 vintage, where there's talk that maybe 20% of the grapes will remain unpicked.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was engineered by Phil Bench and produced by Alexia Russell. Thanks to Ross Wise and Michael Cooper. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Cheers.